I'm Felina.
And I'm Summer.
And you are listening to Broken Broken.
Because we're both.
The podcast about living your best life by getting real.
Hey, broken people. This is Summer.
And this is Felina.
Momentarily, we'll call my friend Alicia, who is a genius. But before we do that, Felina wanted me to give some insight for our listeners, some insight into what's going on right now. As everyone knows, the government has been shut down for the longest time the U.S. federal government has ever been shut down. And as a result, of course, there's furloughs, there's families who are going without pay, and there's also people who are going to be going without food. The USDA has issued a statement that they are funded through the end of February. But because of the way government funding allocations work, what that actually means is those allocations are based on the number of open cases by a certain deadline, which is significantly ahead of time. And it is in fact the 15th, or today was that deadline. And if it's not open, it does if it wasn't open by the end of business today, then it doesn't count for the numbers for the funding allocation, and there's no guarantee that anybody over that, outside of that, is going to get any funding. So, and then after that point, even after February, if the federal government remains closed, then there may not be any funds at all after that either. People are worried about going without food. I've heard from social workers, which I don't talk about it much on the air because I don't want anybody to ever try to make allegations that what I say represents any of my employers or anything like that, but I am a social worker. That is my primary job. And I've heard from social workers from all over. They're all putting in extra hours trying to find resources for their clients because this is creating such a problem. We've got already food banks are already stretched thin, and now we've got additional demand on them because we have families who aren't getting the same income that they had, and now also maybe not getting their SNAP benefits. And if they stop getting their SNAP benefits, where are they going to go? I know there were state workers who work SNAP in Oklahoma who have been putting in overtime the last several days just to make sure that all qualifying cases were opened by the deadline, to make sure that people get to eat. And when I say putting in overtime, and they kept the offices open until 8 p.m. on Friday and Monday, and they were open all day long on Saturday and Sunday. And that is remarkable because I have talked to people who have worked in that department for 30 years who have never seen them pay overtime, and they were begging people to come in, and lots of people gave their time to do that because social workers everywhere are genuinely concerned that that people aren't going to be able to eat. We're already seeing employees missing their paychecks. And I mean, social workers are superheroes, but they should never be in the position of having to literally reduce the body count of a government shutdown, particularly one that is caused simply by a fucking tantrum by an overgrown toddler for his vanity project that is nothing but a monument to his ego, because nobody who has the sense God gave a fucking mule believes that it's going to do a goddamn thing about people crossing the border. It's illogical and irrational, and I don't believe for a second anybody with any fucking sense actually believes that. But the fact that human lives are being treated as expendable right now is horrific, and it needs to stop. And during a conversation about this, I actually saw someone post online about their statement was people shouldn't get food stamps because if you don't learn how to struggle, you won't appreciate the nicer things in life. And my very measured response to that is, if you think people should starve so that they can be more grateful, go fuck yourself. And I hope you're the only one that does do that, because others shouldn't fuck you and reward you for being an awful human being. So, on that note, let's call Alicia.
Hello?
Alicia?
Hi.
Hi, this is Summer.
And this
Hi,
is
Summer.
Selena.
This
This
is
is Selena with a mouthful of food. I'm so sorry.
Sorry, we're having a snack. Cause
You're totally good.
How are you doing?
I am doing good. Preston's a little mad at me because I filled the entire house basically with plaster dust. Was a little bit of an accident, but it's okay.
What were you doing with plaster dust?
Well, I actually just posted a video of it.
Oh, I'm going to have to go watch it now.
Yeah, I'm really liking these time-lapse videos. I made a mold back in November of my friend JP's face.
Okay.
So that I could make him this jaw labre sort of, I guess, I don't even know if it would be considered jewelry. I guess jewelry, maybe a partial mask. And so I was pouring the positive for that, and I had to clean up the plaster positive with my Dremel, and it made a big, big mess. But now I'm all good. Now I can start,
good.
putting together this piece. I'm super excited.
Okay, so obviously Alicia is an artist.
Awesome.
So can you kind of tell us a little of your background and what you work with? Because she works with every medium. I swear that's possible. Yeah. Yeah, we're good.
I put you guys on speaker.
Okay. Yeah, you're on speaker because that's the only way we can all talk to you.
So I got my bachelor's from the University of Oklahoma, and that was in contemporary sculpture and printmaking. So
Which I
I
didn't
do a
know
lot
was a
of
degree.
sculpture with my work.
Now, when did you graduate?
When?
Yeah.
Oh my God, when did I graduate? I mean, fuck. Let's see. No, now I've got to look it up. 2014. That's when I graduated.
Okay. Well, I have a friend who graduated from the arts program at OU and does sculpture.
Oh, really?
And but it was like in 2006 or something.
Oh.
So I was
She
just
was
curious.
still a baby then.
Well, what was your friend's name if they hung around the department?
Well, she teaches at Dartmouth now. I mean, she's
Oh,
been
okay.
there for years.
Oh, okay.
But her name's Brooke Mullins.
Oh, fancy.
Yeah. But anyway, just was curious to make a possible connection.
It's really funny because I got my bachelor's. My primary focus was contemporary sculpture, but I don't think I ever I only made one sculpture that I was like, this. And everything else was really just me learning these techniques and processes. That I was like, well, this is fun, but I don't know what to do with them. And it wasn't until maybe my second semester of grad school that I was like, my first semester they were like, quit doing printmaking because I do woodblock relief printing primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, you need to fucking relax on that and try something else. And I almost had a heart attack, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna listen to them, and I'm really glad I did, because then I was like, okay, what other skills do I have? And now my practice is pretty multidisciplinary because I combine sculpture, printmaking, textiles, video and photography, everything. So
That's awesome. I like the multimedia arts. I mean, that's
Right. That's what
really interesting.
I loved about your show. Was that last year? Time gets away from me. Was
Yeah,
that
it was-
she had not only her pieces hung and labeled, and then of course she did a story about one of them and explained the backstory. So there was storytelling, and there was also a video piece about one of them, and there was a video. There was a video that incorporated some of the pieces too. So I really liked that. It was very. It just felt like there's more depth than when you just go to a gallery and see pieces on display.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was the piece, I guess the main piece that was a part of that little solo exhibition I had in Norman at Resonator.
Right.
Oh, I'm playing there next month, or this month.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a great space. I mean, I love Curtis. I love everybody down there. You know, these are people I got my bachelor's with and that I studied with. So, you know, I've got a big place in my heart for Norman. But the piece that I had finished literally the week before that install was Erendira, which was on display at Pulse Miami at Pulse Play. And that piece, I don't know, it's weird. Everybody's like, the stories are what's important. More stories. And so I was like, okay. And then I made a video piece with the story being told, but no one can understand it because it's an indigenous language.
But I loved that.
Yeah, no, and I remember telling you, because we had talked about it, somebody had told me that, because I figured I would tell them, like, basically the translated version, and I would, like, maybe say it a couple of times for a couple groups of people, but somebody told me that after I'd gone to lunch or something and come back, that people who were there for the first time I told the story, when new people were coming in, they were, like, going up to them and being like, hey, do you want to know what she's saying?
So you created a whole oral tradition right there at your art show.
Exactly. And so that was amazing. That was really awesome. And it was funny because, like, the story of Erendira, she was a Purepecha warrior princess. She, like, killed a conquistador and took his horse. She was the first Indian on her horseback. She was a total badass. I had never heard Purepecha, which is the indigenous language and the people of Michoacan. I'd never heard it before, but my father's family is from Jalisco, Guanajuato, Michoacan, and so I have this in me. And the first time, like, the woman that I worked with, Berenice, when she sent me the audio of her telling the story, I just was sobbing. I was just ugly crying listening to it. Yeah, it was just such an emotional experience to just hear those words and to hear her story in her language, you know. Yeah, it was very powerful. And it was funny, too, because while we were editing the video together, naturally, you know, when you're editing, you have to listen to things over and over and over and over and over again. And you can... it was weird because then I started, like, picking up the Purepecha. Like,
that's cool.
I could tell, like, what part of the story it was by how she was speaking, and also she would drop a name of a character or somebody, some historical figure. And so, yeah, I was like, oh, Harani, you know, Sesi Harani, Yamanducha. Like, I was, like, picking it up as I was listening to it. So I was like, well, that's kind of ideal, right? That's kind of
cool.
how it should be.
Right. Now, I like how your art, you explore identity a lot in your art, or seem to.
Yes.
So, can we talk about the Medusa post you made?
Yeah.
Explain your Medusa theory, because this was
and you posted something somewhere.
It started on her Facebook, and it was a question about Medusa, and yeah, I have been thinking about this for like probably 2 weeks now.
What was the question?
Yeah, no, that was a really good conversation, and I don't know, I like starting conversations like that on my Facebook because I think I'm friends with some really brilliant people, and I love hearing, like, their takes on things and their perspectives, and I really liked, you know, what you had to say, Summer, and everything like that. But basically, I was thinking about, and this all started because I was thinking about doing this new piece, hopefully going to do this year, fingers crossed. But in it, what I wanted to be doing was dressing myself as a deer, essentially. This sort of deer woman hybrid. And so I was looking at, I was reading Rebecca Solnit and like her writings about the deer and its representation of like all of nature, like almost the totality of nature. Like there's very, if you see like a woodland creature, like a raccoon or something like that, you're like, oh, that's they belong in nature, but there's very few things that actually look like a forest. And when you see like deer antlers, like you're seeing an animal that looks like a tree. And so she was basically positing that this is why the buck has always been this sort of whole representation of nature, basically. And she was also writing about oh my gosh, I have ADD, sorry. she was also writing about the like deer crossing sign, like it being a great metaphor for the sort of clashing of nature versus culture. And I had already been working, like my entire thesis was about sort of the indigenous woman's body as a metaphor for the new world, and how do we turn that colonialist, that imperialist narrative on its head. So like if you're trying to condense the entirety of nature into a woman, and you're wanting her to be beautiful, virginal, you know, rapeable, plunderable, you know, pregnable. This is a way to sort of make the environment seem less scary. But if we think about like this sort of romantic idea of like the sublime, of like a landscape that's so large and so vast, it's hostile to our mental faculties. It's incomprehensible and terrifying. And so I was really interested in this idea of turning that narrative on its head and being like, okay, well, if the indigenous woman's body is going to be your metaphor for the new world, then the land is terrifying and these women are terrifying. And that was sort of the impetus for my entire thesis. But, and so then that comes back around, where if we say that a woman is supposed to represent, an indigenous woman is supposed to represent the land, then I was just reading like a buck as a metaphor for the wilderness, and was just like, well, there you go. This is the intersection right here. Besides the fact that Melissa K. Nelson, this writer who I adore, wrote this really great essay about like biophilic sort of narratives in indigenous societies and stuff like that. Like, I mean, the Mayans have stories about women eating fruit and becoming pregnant. The Anishinaabe have stories of like women, you know, squatting to pee and the wind blowing between her legs and her getting pregnant. So like, the woman is sort of the meeting place, the contact zone between the human and more than human, the human and the nature. And so then that image became the deer woman, basically. These two ideas just merged all together in my mind. Like I said, I have ADD, so like all I'm doing all day is just like bridging things. Yeah, and so, but then I was like, well, what am I doing though? And you had said before, Summer, that you had been, I don't know if you were speaking to an elder or something like that, but you were basically like, okay, like, but the Choctaw people, they have a deer woman, and why does she have antlers?
My friend, she's a professor and she teaches some indigenous studies classes, and she was using some deer woman stories, and my question was, well, why have we always depicted deer woman with antlers? Because we had enough knowledge of nature to understand that the female deer do not have antlers. So that had to be a deliberate choice. Why?
Yes.
And I still don't have an answer to the why exactly. But
so my theory then, which comes back to the Medusa thing. My theory, and it's, you know, on my mother's side, I'm Sicilian, and so, you know, the Medusa is on the Sicilian flag. The Medusa image has always been, you know, a big part of my life and my personal history and everything. So it was maybe a little Eurocentric of me, but I sort of looked at the image of a deer woman, and I saw Medusa.
Okay.
I saw, because if we can allow that in the West, in European societies, a snake often represented a phallus, right?
Okay.
And, you know, we look into Medusa's origin story that she was a woman that was raped. And when she was raped, after her assault, her hair turned to serpents. You know, she could turn a man to stone with her gaze. To me, when I thought about all of that, and it was a little Freudian too, probably, but when I thought about all of that, I was like, what is Medusa then but a woman in drag? Okay. But a woman who was assaulted and literally is defeminized herself as a means for protection. Because it never sat right with me that this happened to her as a punishment.
Right.
Especially since, oh my gosh, what was her name? One of the goddesses, one of the virgin goddesses, for her feast day, they would, like, I don't know, take all of the, like, predators of the town and they would just stone them. And that was something the Greeks did on her holiday. Like, the annual stoning of the local pedophiles.
Is that Artemis?
So, like, there was this culture, it seemed like, at least partially, in respect to these goddesses, of punishing men for doing things like this. And so it never sat right with me that she was punished by being given this power and by being given these snakes.
So she was given a weapon, not a curse.
Exactly. It's a weapon.
I think I remember seeing this on your feed or something.
Probably, because we talked about it for quite a while.
Yeah, and I loved this theory. I really love it because, yeah, I mean, being able to stop someone, it is a weapon. Being able to protect, it's a protection. Yeah, it's a defense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and so she'd also talked about the defeminizing, which is something a lot of women do when they survive assault. Is they do whatever our own perception is of feminine. A lot of us will try to change that
and
because we feel like it's going to protect us. It doesn't. It's irrational. But I feel like that's just an innate thing that we do. Sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience, I have reflected on the fact that I have taken on male traits consciously to, like, you know, help protect myself as a defense. I make sure I have a firm handshake and things like silly things like that because I want to fit into a man's world and see it as a self-preservation and protection and defense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even, like, I sort of, like, accidentally, and I don't know, I mean, I'm not an etymologist or anything like that, but I sort of realized that also Medusa means guardian.
Oh.
And med, that sort of prefix, is used in medicine.
Right.
And it means to take appropriate measures. And I was just thinking about that, to take appropriate measures, like to do what needs to be done. And, I mean, her snakes are the snakes that are on the medical staff.
Oh, that's true. I didn't thought about that.
And so it was all of that. And then, coming back to the deer woman, I was like, this is a woman in drag. This is, this is a woman who is trying
Can
to
you
sort of
explain what Dear Woman does in the stories
yeah.
for those who don't know this?
No, definitely. So, well, like, we didn't, and I try to be very mindful and very careful, because I do know people do have Dear Woman stories. To my knowledge, the Nawas, the Purapechas, the Chichimecas, the people that I'm likely descend from, to my knowledge, they do not have a Dear Woman story, so I want to be really careful. We have, like, Dear Man stories, but we don't have Dear Woman stories. But, you know, Frida Kahlo painted herself as a deer.
And, yeah, she's my favorite.
Yeah, no, it's incredible.
Well, I've depicted myself as Frida Kahlo in my music videos. Yeah, I'm a huge fan.
She's amazing.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, what was...
I'm sorry, I totally threw you off. You just...
No, you're totally...
You mentioned my favorite lady, so...
in Dear Woman stories.
Yeah,
what she does.
So, in the piece that I'm hopefully going to be doing this summer, in the piece, I'm going to be dressing myself as a deer woman, and I want to be carrying a fawn, and I'm going to be whispering to the fawn the entire time, I believe you, I believe you, I believe you, because sort of what started this was the realization that I had this past year that being told I don't believe you is almost as traumatizing as the actual event. The actual assault.
Yeah. Being called a liar, essentially, is not... It's not a good feeling, ever.
No. And like, trust is a survival tool. You know, like, if people don't believe you, if you're untrustworthy, then you're alienated from a community.
Yes.
And so it's extremely alienating, it's extremely violent, and you know, what we saw with the Kavanaugh hearing and everything like that, like, that was just very emotional to all survivors. I'm certain, sort of watching this woman being taken to task like she was for something horrible that was done to her. But in the video, I'm going to be dressed as this dear woman, carrying this fawn, walking down a road, and behind me is going to be walking a wolf. So.
And what is the wolf representative of? Men?
So, okay, no. So, it's funny, because I work with animals a lot in my work, and I think every time I do, I'm really trying to sort of deconstruct sort of societal perceptions of these animals. And so, what represents man in the video is actually the road. Because walking on the side of a road or on a road is imminent danger if you're a deer, if you're a person. So the fawn obviously represents the inner child, the part of you that needs to be consoled after something like that. The deer woman then represents how a survivor relates to her body after something like that happens. And then the wolf and the antlers are what have a relationship in the video. So the antlers that I'm making aren't just going to be any antlers. They're going to be shedding their velvets. They're going to be bloody. There's going to be splash hanging off of them. And I'm trying to call attention to the life cycle of the antlers. They're deciduous. After they shed their velvet, they harden, and then they eventually fall off. And so in Mexican culture, in Huichol culture in particular, the Huichol people believe that their deer, their blue deer, its antlers hold back the storms. They hold back the clashing cloud gates, is the phrase that I've heard most. And so I really want to get a shot of the wolf walking behind me between these like bloody antlers, because what I'm sort of making a reciprocal threat to the road. I'm saying, if I'm sort of being merciful right now, if I'm just consoling myself and just figuring out how to relate to myself after something violent and terrible just happened to me, then what I'm holding back for you very briefly is everything survivors are allowed to feel. Power, anger, revenge. They tell us, oh, forgive and forget. Like, you have to forgive. That's the only way to recover from trauma. When the fact of the matter is, forgiving is a way of recovering from trauma, but it's not the only way.
Amen. Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of times people talk about forgiving when what they're really saying is repress it. They don't want you to have these emotions about it, so they just want you to hide it.
Yeah.
Yes. And I believe, like, just as an aside to that, I believe it was even, didn't the Choctaw practice victim justice, I believe is what, like, anthropologists call it, which is basically, like, if something happened, if a woman was, like, raped, the tribe would get together, they would grab her assailant, bring her assailant to her, and then whatever she said would bring justice, brought justice. So if the woman was like, I just want him to apologize, he would have to apologize. If she said, I want his balls cut off and I want to wear a necklace out of them, then they would cut his balls off and make it.
Yes.
So constantly, obviously I have to bring my European heritage and my indigenous heritage, but always I feel like these pieces, my work is coming from that sort of ethos of how would we have done this? Mm-hmm. And so I guess with the piece I'm sort of saying we're recuperating, and while we are, you're safe for now.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like it.
I love this a lot. I particularly and I don't think I've ever really had somebody verbalize that, forgiveness is repression or can be repression and is not the only way to heal from trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because I get told a lot, well, you need to just forgive and let that go. Just forgive for yourself, even if they don't deserve forgiveness, which sometimes is, and like forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean forgetting. Yeah. And forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to, you can forgive and still be angry at the same time. I think there's a way to, let something be in the past, but still be processing that trauma in other ways.
And I think it looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
So people need to stop telling others how to handle their own trauma.
Yeah. If you don't want to be a part of their healing process, then you can go the fuck away.
Right.
But you don't need to be judging other people for how they're handling their shit.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. And even if, this is something that I've also learned in the last few years, even if you can reconcile with yourself what happened to you, your body still remembers it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And your body remembers it in a way that it doesn't matter if mentally you've forgiven them or not.
Yeah.
You're still going to have panic attacks.
Yeah.
You're still
absolutely. Yeah, I recently ran into, for the first time, and I'm sorry to make this about me now, but I just want to give a real life example of what we're talking about. I had broken up with an abusive boyfriend in April of last year, and I ran into him for the first time in November, and it was crazy how I just my mental state, like, immediately went back to, like, a state of panic upon seeing him, and that didn't mean that I hadn't dealt with a lot of it. Yeah, of course, there's still some scars, but, my initial reaction of fear and anxiety and going back to that same place does not mean that I haven't at least on some level, dealt with and worked on some of the trauma that had caused me. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate it very much.
So, can you tell us about your experience with the DNA testing? Because Felina is interested in possibly doing one to locate relatives. So, can you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, my dad's from San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and I'm interested in tracking down some relatives in my Mexican heritage.
Well, I did my DNA test just because, like, I always knew, I was like, okay, like, just from the way my father was described to me, it's like, I know I don't know, the indigeneity in Mexico, it's like 90% of the population has some indigenous heritage. Usually half, I think 60% is mestizo, and then 10% is European, and 30% is 100% indigenous. Okay. So I did my DNA test, and I was like, confirmed, Dad was a mestizo. So
yeah, my dad's a mestizo. From what I understand, my grandfather was from Spain, and my grandmother was an Aztec Indian. So yeah, I'm a mestizo on my dad's side, from what I know.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's usually how that goes.
Yeah.
So they'll give you if you go through Ancestry, they'll give you your communities, your genetic communities, which was super, super helpful for me because I knew my father grew up in Guadalajara. I knew that's where he left, but I didn't really know anything past that point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. My dad left from San Luis Potosí around in the 70s, but his sisters all lived in Guadalajara, and I still have family in Guadalajara.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's dope. Lots of tequila, lots of mariachis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, like, everything you think Mexico is just Jalisco. That's what it is.
But anyway, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. I'm just, like, finding it fascinating that you have a similar background.
But yeah, so my genetic communities came up, and it basically confirmed what I already knew, that I was castiza, I was a quarter, and that, my genetic communities were in Michoacan, Jalisco, and Guanajuato. So that was super, super helpful. But do you know your, like, father's family at all?
I mean, the only living relative that I know of is an uncle, or I guess, my dad's 3 brothers live in the United States, but I think he's got one sister that's still alive that lives in the Guadalajara area, but my cousin, it's like one of his sister's sons, is our main contact with our family, our Mexican family that still lives in Mexico. And that's really it.
Because I didn't even, my mom told me my father's name was Pedro Velasquez, and his name is Pedro Valadez, so I didn't even have his name, basically, my entire life.
Oh, wow.
But if you have a name, if you can trace your ancestry back as far as you can, the Indigenous Cultures Institute in Texas, they did, I'm not sure if they still do, but they did have a program where you would give them basically your lineage, and they would go through the Spanish encomienda system. Are you familiar with that system?
No.
So, the Spanish obviously didn't keep rolls, which sucks for us in a lot of ways, but they did keep slaves. They kept a lot of slaves.
Okay.
So, yeah, as you do when you're a colonizing fuckhead.
European fuckhead.
They had this thing where they were basically, the encomienda was that they would put X amount of Indians, air quotes, in the care of a conquistador, basically. They would be like, oh, here is some land for you to build your, beautiful home on, and here's like 40 Indians. So, what the ICI in Texas was doing for a while was, again, if you were like, oh, my family's name is Valadez or something like that, they would go back in the records and they'd be like, oh, the conquistador Valadez was given 40 Indians from Michoacan, you are Purapacha. Or, if you're, my family name is Flores, the conquistador Flores was given 60 Indians from Oaxaca, so on and so forth.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm Rivera, so.
What they were doing is basically triangulating, people's heritage, essentially. Because, if you're lucky enough to still have relatives that are on, like, ejidos and stuff like that, which obviously very few of us are. Mexico doesn't like giving land to Indians to just live on. So...
That's interesting. You and I'd like to talk with you after the podcast, just with some questions, if you don't mind, because I'd kind of like to dig into this a little more.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was pretty, like, obviously I don't have my family traced back that far, so the genetic communities were what was really helpful for me.
Mm-hmm. And you went through 23andMe?
I went through Ancestry.
Oh, Ancestry, okay.
Yeah, and I was able to find a cousin, which was incredible. She was like, oh my god, we had no idea you existed. And I was like, imagine!
See, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I know I have a shitload of cousins in the Guadalajara area and Mexico City. I know I do. My dad is, I don't speak Spanish, and my dad is just not great at maintain, he talks to my one cousin and he doesn't, I've been asking him, I'm like, can you find out who else we're related to there? And he just won't do it. And I'm like, okay. But I imagine, I know my cousins are my age, and so they probably speak English, right? Because they see the value in being bilingual versus us Americans here who think everybody should bend to our whim. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. So,
well, that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what else do you have going on? Where can you be found? Where's your art, and what's your social media and all that? Because I want to look you up, and other people might as well.
You can find me. My website is aliciasmith.work. And my Instagram, I post mostly on Instagram.
Ditto. Okay.
Unless I have a really long conversation, and then I'll post it on Facebook. Yeah, good conversations. But I'm Alicia Smith Art on Instagram. So, yeah. And you asked what else I was working on?
Yes.
So... right now, what I got in a bunch of trouble this morning for making a mess for, is another piece that I'm working on that I don't know if I'm gonna manage to get it finished this year. It might be a next year piece because it's really, really involved. Because I'm gonna have to make 2 sets of regalia for it. But basically, in the piece, what you're gonna see in the video is me and my friend JP dressed as Xochitl and Xochipilli, and every article of clothing and jewelry that we're wearing is going to double as a hummingbird feeder. And
I love that.
That's awesome.
And we're going to film it in a hummingbird sanctuary. So
that's awesome.
I just want to see them with hummingbirds chasing them.
As we haven't even sat down, and the birds are like, "Hey, slow down. We're trying to drink." And it's sort of that piece. That piece, I'm still like, I don't know. I feel like every day I'm uncovering something else because Xochitl and Xochipilli are sort of our two-spirit. I'm not going to call them deities. Or two-spirit essences, we'll say. The two-spirit manifestation of, the great spirit of Teot. Two-Spirit medicine, and that led into a really long conversation with some of my friends about what Two-Spirit medicine is, because I know, like, you all probably know, like, I think this past year was the first year that they allowed people to dance in the categories of the gender they identify as at, like, the Gathering of Nations. That was huge. When I went to Standing Rock, Two-Spirit Camp was, right in the center of the camp, and everybody was making such a big deal. Like, I saw so many Two-Spirit elders that were just sobbing. They couldn't believe that Two-Spirits were being treated so essential to the ceremony of the place. And so with all of that, got into a discussion about what Two-Spirit medicine is, and one of my friends was like, like, an elder told me Two-Spirit medicine is clown medicine, and I just, that just rubbed me the wrong way.
What does that mean?
Like,
clown medicine.
Clown medicine, I guess, like, I don't know if he was talking to a Hopi elder, like, ooh, like, I don't know.
Which, I mean, they don't have the concept of Two-Spirit. Two-Spirit, the phrase Two-Spirit, for listeners who don't know, originates from a sacred teaching with the Anishinaabe people, who believe that, whereas in Western culture we talk about, like, being gay or whatever as an orientation, they believe you have both, that Two-Spirit people have both masculine and feminine spirits. They literally have two spirits within their body, and they have specific medicine and responsibilities and roles and things. So it's a very
special,
right, and it's more than just an identity. Like, so when she's talking about medicine, it's really about medicine ways, and they have particular duties and healing ways.
That's really awesome.
That's why I was like, what does he mean, clown medicine? What does that mean?
Yeah.
I guess, like, if I'm thinking about clowns in the context of, like, the Hopi people, like, I'm thinking about, like, I don't know, like, the person who makes you laugh, or the person who makes fun of how people act.
Right, because they did have particular roles, right, with clowning in their culture.
And so I don't think that the elder meant it offensively or anything like that, but it still kind of rubbed me a little weird, because I was like, I could see somebody who is indigenous and is a drag queen having clown medicine. Like, I would call being a drag queen clown medicine.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, but I don't think I wouldn't be comfortable calling. We call our M to F trans women. We called them Shochiwan. It means flower bearer, and it's because they carried our most sacred flowers. They carried our most sacred plants in ceremony, which was our peyote, our teonanakat, which is mushrooms, snake flower, morning glories, all of those plants that were, our entheogens. They're very, very essential to a very specific type of ceremony. And that's what, if you see the statue of Xochipilli,
okay,
if you it's you see his name means flower prince, and he is like sitting with his legs crossed, and he's reclining back. He has a huge smile on his face, and he's wearing this really big headdress, and all over his body is covered in these plants, in these sacred plants. And so I was thinking about basically who we were to ceremony, which was the carriers of this very, very, very sacred medicine, who we were and who we are today. So Shochuan is just one of our genders, as I explained. We had so many names for gay women, gay men, trans women. We had so many words for those. But Shochuan, now, if you go to Nahuatl communities in Mexico, they call trans women machoch, which means flower hand, and it's used as a slur.
Oh.
Yeah, and And there's like communities, obviously, where Two-Spirit people are still held very sacred. Again, particularly M to F trans women.
Okay.
And they're called mouches. And so I was just thinking about all of those things, thinking about those elders, those Two-Spirit elders that were crying at Standing Rock, thinking about clown medicine, thinking about our rules and ceremonies before colonizer came and what our situation is like now. And I was just thinking, like, can medicine change over time? Because if you think about what these sort of representations are, and obviously the Aztecs made a lot of art and a lot of sculpture, so I'm speaking from that place. But our iconography, basically, for all of these manifestations of the Great Spirit, we're also a record of the history of those things and a record of time. And so I was like, so according to our tradition, if I take that, medicine would change over time with the history of whatever manifestation it is. And so I was like, what if Two-Spirit medicine now also includes returning medicine for coming back after being, cast aside, after being pushed away. And I'm getting a little choked up. And as I was thinking about that, the only person I could think of was my friend JP, who has been a huge inspiration to me. He was the person that I went with the first time I went to Mexico. And so in a lot of ways, this piece is also to honor him because he brought me back.
Oh, I see.
And so, yeah, so in the piece, it's really a celebration of what our roles were, what our roles are now, and having these hummingbirds, these messengers of Teot, of the Great Spirit, coming back and forth from us, drinking from us, is sort of my way of saying, like, we're here now.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that's what the piece is. I'm like sort of condensing it by just being like, oh, it's my celebration of Two-Spiritness, of queerness, of all of that stuff. But yeah, that's really what that piece is going to be. Whenever I can get it done, it's going to take a long time to make everything.
So when will you be showing this? When's your next showing? Or do you have anything on display right now?
And my next exhibition, I'm in Untitled in San Francisco, the Untitled Art Fair, and Teo Mama is going to be showing there, and that's the piece that is probably my favorite piece that I've done so far, and it's me kneeling in a lake with a hawk eating off of my back.
That's awesome. Do you have anything, and you're here in Norman, right?
No, she's
I'm in Albuquerque now.
Okay.
Yeah, but I originally am from Oklahoma.
Yeah, I was looking you up on Instagram as we were chatting, and we've got some similar friends and followers, so I was curious. Yeah. But we'll have to catch up with you. Please send us a link to where everything can be found, and we will put it on your podcast episode when we post it.
Yeah, definitely.
And do you mind if I give Felina your number so you guys can chat about things?
Yeah, no, of course.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You can contact the podcast at brokebrokenpodcast@gmail.com. The Broken Podcast can be found on Twitter at Broke Broken Show, on Instagram and Facebook at Broke Broken Podcast.